We are 20 seconds out.
Don't do that, Robert. That would be very bad.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Tom Vasel, and today I thought I would do a video here live with a couple publisher friends of mine where we talked about shipping, since this seems to be occasionally mentioned on the internet these days. So I'll let them introduce themselves. We'll start with you, Rob.
Hi, Robert Geistlinger. Most people know me. I am the Director of Sales and Marketing at Arcane Wonders.
All right, and then Nathan.
Yeah, I am Nathan McNair. I'm one of the two co-owners of Pandasaurus Games.
Now, for folks, the reason I'm doing this video is I thought that, you know, there's a lot of people speculating and yelling about shipping and things, and this has definitely affected me on a personal level, since we're currently running our pledge manager for the Dice Tower Kickstarter, and people are having a little bit of sticker shock here when seeing the shipping costs, and I'm definitely getting a lot of emails about that. I do want to be clear going into this. I have relationships with both companies. Pandasaurus sponsors many of our videos, and I work on the Dice Tower Essentials with Arcane Wonders, but if you think that affects this, I don't know what else to tell you. I'm talking to these because both of these folks have, both these guys have talked about this extensively, and so I thought this would be something. I think the biggest linchpin here that's caused a lot of people yelling over the past couple weeks has been CMON sent out their shipping things. I woke up in the morning, went to do it, and I knew it would be expensive shipping, but my eyes were definitely widened when I saw how much it got cost to ship to me, and I didn't even do the Galactus Mini. So people went online immediately and said companies are being greedy here. So I'll open up to you guys. What is the reality of shipping, and how has it changed in the last few years?
Yeah, I think I'll jump in first, and I know Rob's got more direct experience going on right now, but the reality of shipping over the last 8 or 9 months is that it's broken basically completely at every level. That starts with like getting a truck in China to take it to the port in China, finding a boat, finding a container in China to put it on, getting it across the ocean, getting it unloaded from the port in the US. Getting it on a train was almost impossible forever because the shipping companies needed the container back. So you had to pay to transload the 40-foot container onto an 18-wheeler, truck it to a warehouse, and then pay to truck it. So to put it in perspective, about 2 years ago, the cost of a 40-foot container was between $6,000 and $9,000. If it was peak season, like Chinese New Year or Christmas, maybe you're looking at 11 or 12. When Dino World was fulfilling, one of our containers was $38,000 delivered to our warehouse in Knoxville. Now that was about as bad as it got, but even more so, you know, within the U.S., you look at the price of a gallon of gasoline, right? That is directly correlating to shipping costs because shipping companies are having to pay for gas. We could routinely, like a small ticket to ride size box, we used to be able to ship that for $13 to $16 to most of the U.S. That's now creeping up in the $20, $22 range, which is, yeah, $7 doesn't seem like a lot, but as a percentage of the cost of shipping, it's quite high. And frankly, and I'm sure I'll let Robert talk to this, the higher the volume gets, that number goes up exponentially. It's not a flat line, and your nights is you're actually more increased costs going on for that.
So that's actually one thing that's people don't understand. Yeah, it might cost us to ship this game, but of them to go up at the same rate versus the increase in the size. So while it might be, 10 pounds total of game, the shipping is 25 pounds.
Yep.
And so any of those small increments in shipping are now expanded even further. And just to roll back to the freight shipping side of thing, I will give a number as well. And because I obviously have very recent experience with this, with Foundations of Rome, back when we ran that Kickstarter, which was before all of these increases, and container prices, $7,000 to $10,000 was a fairly norm to get a container, a 40-foot high cube from China to the United States. Back then, the freight estimate on this honestly, we were overestimating it. Should have been $120,000 to $150,000 to get everything where it needed to be. In the end, with these increases, we spent over $400,000 getting the games just to the fulfillment hubs. That is a massive change.
Yeah.
And that doesn't just translate to Kickstarters, that translates to retail games too, which now those shipping prices are eating into margins, which were already slim. I was actually just yesterday looking at one of our retail games, Aquatica. And Nathan, this is going to make you cry a little when you hear these numbers. I was looking at it for a reprint and what the container cost would be now. And typically we break down a container cost on a per unit basis, and we factor that into how we price a game. When we did the first printing of Aquatica, the per unit cost was like $1.25 in terms of freight. Not terrible, but when we run that same thing now, we're over $4 added to the landed cost of that. And for those watching, landed cost is typically everything it takes to get that game to its final destination for us.
Can I ask a quick question here?
On the distribution.
When it comes to, you mentioned landed cost, which is the cost of shipping the game to you, basically, or to the distributor. In the past, that cost has not typically been passed on to the consumer, or it's put into the price. Is that still something that's reasonable to do? Like, where does that cost come in? Is it put into the price of the game, or is it added to the cost when I say you as a Kickstarter backer buy the game?
So in retail, landed cost is typically built into the cost of the MSRP. It's the numbers we use to come up with the MSRP. In Kickstarter world, that runs a little different. The landed cost normally, in the past, we would have ran it more to the price that we're going to charge for the game. As container prices have gone to astronomical levels, we've had to shift some of that. And now we're having to shift some of that into the shipping price. And that's actually partially a fairness thing. So let's say that the container cost is going to add, I don't know, at this point, it could, for a Kickstarter, it could add $15 to a single game. If we were to put that into the landed cost for figuring out the price we're charging, well, then we're costing everyone the same, no matter where you live. And that's going to get us backlash. Like, we're going to be like, why am I paying for shipping for somebody in Venezuela? So we've had to adjust those numbers so that the shipping price is partially reflecting that as well. I'll be honest, no publisher, even when I saw these CMON prices, no publisher is taking that pure freight and directly putting it on backers. When I saw the new CMON, when I first saw CMON's campaign the first time, I saw that shipping table and I immediately was like, there's no way. Unless they are subsidizing this in ways that Nathan and I can't even imagine, to be honest. But when I saw the new prices, while I was shocked about the difference, I still felt they were low.
Yeah, and I'll sort of speak to how the pricing of ocean freight. So Rob's completely correct. So when we charge you shipping, either on a Kickstarter campaign or like you buy it from our website, we're really only charging you that last mile shipping cost, like from our warehouse to your door. And the cost of the ocean freight, that's part of the sort of land, like the landing cost is the all-in cost to produce the game. And that's always been sort of either explicitly or implicitly factored into the SRP of any game. But what is shifting and what's gotten weird, and we'll put a pin in Kickstarter for a second. So Machi Koro, small game, sells a lot. If we floor load Machi Koro, we can get about 11 or 12,000 units in a 40-foot HQ container, which is like kind of the big standard containers. With the current shipping costs, about half the cost of Machi Koro is getting it to the US instead of printing it. And it's a $30 game. It's not a super expensive one. But that starts looking at like, if we were making, say, $4 a copy, $5 a copy in profit, without increasing that SRP, we're now making $1 or $2 a copy in profit. And really, I think across the board and in our industry and in others, I think a lot of what you're seeing right now is 18 months of companies eating that margin, hoping things get back to normal, and they didn't. And now I think it's sort of like the rude awakening for everybody, not just in the board game space, but across every industry where, you know, companies basically operated at very low profit for most of 2021. And it's starting to hit the reality of, okay, we can't pay our employees, we can't keep the lights on if we're making if we're spending $1 to make $1.10, that's not enough margin to keep us going. So I think a lot of what's happening right now is folks that have given up on the fact that shipping is going to go back to normal, and it might reduce at some point, but it's so unpredictable. And the other thing that you're seeing right now, and I'm not going to name names, but I've talked to 3 different campaign runners who collected shipping costs in January, February, March of 2021, which was the last time shipping was normal. And so they collected shipping based on shipping tables that were no longer accurate once they started shipping. So that's the thing you have to talk about a lot with the Kickstarter. It looks like a bunch of money up front, and it is, but it's also an immediate liability on your books, because now you owe a game to customers. But if it's a retail game and our price of shipping goes through the roof, we could just up the SRP because no one's bought it yet. We could charge more shipping because we haven't charged the shipping yet. With a Kickstarter, you're very often getting the shipping money 9 months, 6 months before the shipping happens, and you're very often collecting the cash for the games 12 to 24 months or worse, depending on the campaign, before that happens. So one thing that we've been doing, and we've been getting a little bit of grief, is we're running the pledge manager much closer to the shipping date now, which is tighter, and it means people need to fill out the pledge manager quicker. But it does mean like the likelihood for like Skate Summer that our shipping charges are going to change dramatically between today and July, August is lower. And so I think you're going to see a whole lot of pledge managers not opening for a year after the campaign ends as a result of some of this, so that companies don't find themselves taking on all of the risk of something changing on them without them knowing it. And that came out of nowhere for everybody, because shipping has been like pretty predictably, like it goes up 5 to 8% every calendar year, and you could figure that out. And then it didn't.
Right. So when we ran Foundations, we're one of those companies that ran in that just period right before. We put a little buffer because we knew that things might be a little volatile. And also there's the expected. You expect a 5 to 10% change year over year. So we baked that in, and that should have been fine. But then we ended up seeing, these historic updates to where Foundations of Rome, even the fulfillment side of it, ended up costing us on average $10 to $12 more per copy than we charged in the beginning. And so that's the other piece of this equation. Nathan touched on it a minute ago when he talked about last mile, and that's what a lot of people assume. They look at, I can go to my local FedEx and I can ship a box that size for $25. Why can't you? Well, the other side of that is we also have to use fulfillment companies, and that comes with its own overhead as well. It's not cheap to have a full warehouse staff that's going through packing things up, labeling them, shipping them. They have their own employees, so we have that additional overhead, and that can vary wildly depending on where you're shipping from, fulfillment hubs, and things like that. So last mile is great, and same thing for us. For our web store, if you order there, we're just charging you straight pass through last mile, nothing else. But that's not the case for something like Kickstarter.
Well, Nathan, you mentioned that you reduced the time in between the people filling out the pledge manager and shipping, and some people in the comments here have said something effective, we'll just charge it when you actually ship it. Is that even a logistical possibility?
No, because you have to remember, when you charge for Kickstarter, that price is not, if you live in Europe, that game's not shipping from America, it's shipping from Germany or somewhere in Europe. If you're in Asia, it's hub shipping out of China. If you're in Australia, New Zealand, it's coming out of Australia. So we have to collect the numbers early enough so that we know where to split the games off. Because we're going to need 2 containers to Europe, 4 to the US. Canada comes from the US, but we have to know where people live. In a perfect world, yeah, I would love to charge shipping the moment the game lands. And if we had a campaign that was geographically fenced, like say we had an IP that we only had in North America, that's probably exactly what we would do. But you really have to collect that information. And the other thing I'll say, and I of our Kickstarter backers, about 20% of people won't fill out the pledge manager until the game starts shipping anyway.
Yes.
About 3% will never fill it out, and then 3 years later they'll remember. But that causes its own, just dealing with that, where we have to produce enough games for everybody, because these people are owed a game. They didn't tell us where they live. They haven't paid shipping yet, but eventually they will. And so we're already having to do a lot of guesswork of, okay, do we think most of the people who didn't fill this out are in America? What's the mix of overages we're going to send? And I'll tell you, on the Dino World campaign, we wound up with just for whatever reason, Australians at a higher clip than anyone else just did not fill out that pledge manager. We ran out of games in Australia because we guessed a number. And now the cost to get your game is shipping usually from China or the US. And that'll take a $25 shipping fee and make it $120, $140. So that's why we have to split these games off at the factory, because absolutely nobody wants to pay the actual cost of shipping an individual game going across an ocean. And in fact, you could go on our website, and if you live outside of the US, you can see what it costs, because people asked us to put it on there, and we mostly get angry emails about why would I spend $180 on a $40 game. It's like, I would not either, but we wanted to give people the option.
We have the exact same setup. It's interesting you say Australia. We had the same exact problem where because we did it earlier, and we didn't. I would have liked to have waited till the end to open that pledge manager, but we did the same thing. We had it open, but there was a certain number of people who just never did it until the very end, and majority were in Australia as well, to where we ended up, we had already buffered we figured out the numbers. We buffered a 10% overage for Australia, and we still ran out of copies and had to move stock from China. But so that's what comes into a problem. If we do wait, like Nathan's talking about, we wait till closer to shipping to charge shipping, which means opening a pledge manager, because there's no way to do that any other way currently. We run the risk of not splitting the games at the factory correctly. Yeah. And that's going to cost us even more time and money and backers' dissatisfaction, because those backers who were shorted in Australia, they've got to now wait while everyone else is enjoying their game. They've got to wait for their games to move to that hub for them, or pay an insane amount that it's not technically their fault. And where the campaigns that this really affects. Now, if it's something that's going to retail, you can normally massage. You know you're producing X number of games. But again, I look at something like Rome, where that was not a game that was going to retail. It couldn't go to retail, which means we only were going to produce the amount we needed, which means we had slim margins. We knew these are the overages. We couldn't produce more than that. If we had waited until close to shipping, we would have been 100% guesswork.
Yeah.
And if suddenly we didn't get the late pledges that we thought we'd get, or we got the opposite, we got way more, we would be sitting with our hands empty going, we don't have what we need.
Yeah.
So that's the downside to waiting later too.
It's also easier. So for us, we're fulfilling a pretty simple game. It's a Ticket to Ride size box, Skate Summer, a couple thousand copies are going out. That's logistically simpler. So when you're talking, not to like give, help Rob too much here, but when you're talking about something that might be coming over on 15 or 16 containers, they don't all finish at the same time. So that's like another thing. So you really you can't open it too late, because very often your first container is leaving the factory months before your last container is, because the factories don't have infinite storage, right? They will yell at you because they've got to get it out of there so that they have more space to assemble games. And so you've got to have that first container. As a company, you figure out what to do, which is, do you wait for all the containers to come in, or do you start shipping some early when they hit your warehouse, knowing that some backers are just going to get the game much earlier than others? And that's its own logistics question. And it used to be easy to say, like, well, we'll wait for all the containers to hit. But last year, we were with Dino World, the last container was almost 2.5 months after the first, because the first one left before the container shortage hit. Then you've got warehouses that are short-staffed, got too much stuff sitting in the warehouse screaming at you that our warehouse is completely full. We've got to get stuff out the door. So that's a lot of the little stuff that's still going on, which is these third-party shipping companies that we've never had a problem with. They're now short-staffed. They had staff quit. They don't have the ability. I mean, at one point we had to transload a floor-loaded container to a third warehouse we'd never used, pay them to palletize it and ship it to our warehouse, because our main warehouse couldn't receive an unpalletized container for almost 2 months. And so there's just a lot of logistic steps behind the scenes that used to be pretty smooth. I mean, we're a small company. We're 6 people. Molly and I used to run Kickstarters when it was just the 2 of us, and it was a side gig. And the logistics was so straightforward that we could rely completely on third-party companies to figure all of it out, get it where we needed to go, and get it out the door with very little oversight from us. Dino World, I mean, my daughter was born in the middle of that campaign, and I was working at 2 a.m. trying to figure out logistics problems while she was screaming, because everybody broke. Everybody that you lean on, everybody that used to do a good job for you, all of a sudden isn't, because they're just over capacity and overworked. And so that's a lot of what happened as well. Is there's a financial cost that we're all experiencing, and I know campaigns that have lost almost 7 figures in the last year. But there's also kind of this mental toll that's been going on, I think, for most of the world. But I think at the publisher tier, it's been a lot less fun figuring out the shipping stuff, than it used to be, because I don't want to run a logistics company. I want to run a board game publisher. But really right now, I run a logistics company, which is not the fun. Like, I want to look at art and gameplay and put out the best games we can. But I'm spending 60-70% of our day with our shipping team right now, figuring out, can we get a container? Is it going to be profitable to release the game at the price we said we could, and all that? So it's just a lot. It's a mess.
That's interesting that you mentioned that, because that's what we deal with here at the Dice Tower. We're trying to put out videos and content that people ask for, and yet I have 2 people full-time at this point that are doing just almost only logistics.
Yeah.
I don't want to derail this, because I know we can make a whole video about this topic, but could you briefly respond? Because the answer most people involved are saying, well, then just don't make stuff in China, make it here in America. Why is that not feasible?
So this is, I wish that our production manager, Ann, was on, because they can talk all day about this and have, but the reality is there are factories in North America. They exist. Most of them are owned by the Hasbros and the Spin Masters of the world, where they're producing their games for themselves. There are a handful of producers that do exist in North America. The reality is what they are able to produce is very limited compared to what production capacity, but both capacity, how much can we make, the quality of different components. So if you're making a little card game right now, I would probably be printing that in America. If I was just making a small card game, I would probably produce that in the US right now, because the shipping costs would outset the additional cost of labor. The reality is it's not just about our factory. Like, our factory is in China, or one of our factories in China. We have another in Germany, but they don't make the vacuum form trays. They don't make the dice. They don't make the miniatures. They don't make the weird little winks that come in, the little see-through plastic stuff. They don't make any of that in-house. So when you make a game with custom engraved dice, they're going to a dice factory and they're sourcing it. And so when we quote a game, they're quoting the assembly, printing of the paper for the most part, and then the procurement of things from potentially 5 or 6 other warehouses that are local to where they are. So when you produce in America, most of that plastic, it's still coming over from China. The other thing that happened is, as the US printing industry, back in the 70s and 80s started becoming much smaller, because we used to produce more paper goods in the US than we do now. A lot of the machinery that automates this stuff was sold and shipped to China. And so a lot of things like card sorters, card sorting machines, cutting machines, the things that fold the boxes up, China just has far more of those. So I think that, I live in Austin, which is a big tech hub, right? We used to, in the 90s, be a huge chip fab city. And then a lot of that died off and it moved overseas. That's coming back because we need more chip fabrication. I think you are going to see more things start being produced locally. It's going to take a while for stuff to come online because we need the factories and the capacity. But the real thing is the board game business, the paper printing goods business, it's low volume, relatively speaking. Like, the biggest board game of the year, you're not going to make as many of those as you're making PlayStation 5s, right? Or iPhones. So it's low volume, relatively low margin. It's a very old school business. We don't have the finances to put a factory together ourselves. There are companies that are much larger than us that do. I'm not saying it's impossible that manufacturing could return to the US at some point. It may cost more. It may cost more than people are willing to pay. It may cost more than the cost of freight would offset. But right now, the reality is it's not here. And even if we wanted to, it would be difficult. But like, we could print games in Germany pretty easily. And that's obviously a large economy, much like the US. It's just that Germany never lost their paper goods printing business. So a lot of it is, if I could, maybe we would. I suspect that what you're going to see more likely than that is, as cost of production in China has increased, I know some companies are already moving production to Vietnam. And so I think what is more likely to happen, and we could get into sort of consumer behavior, because I know that's another topic we want to hit on, but we will hear, I want it to be produced in America, I don't care how much more it costs. But I can tell you, if the cost of one of our games goes from $30 to $40, our sales are half. And so I think there are a lot of people who that is true for. They would love to buy an American produced game, and that matters to them. But for a whole lot of other people, they don't know, they don't care where stuff is made. They want it to be as high quality for as low a price as possible. And that's the reality. Is 90% of our consumers, all they care about is price and the game. And there are folks that would vote with their wallets and would want to support games made in the US, but I don't know what the real number on that is. And I think the fact that most stuff's been made in China, even at much larger companies, probably speaks to the fact that getting the cost low is what drives most purchasing decisions.
Nathan, you pretty much summed it up. I actually don't have anything to add. I had things in my head, and one by one, you knocked them out. So excellent.
So let me ask you this: when it comes to shipping, there's a couple factors when I'm ordering, and I'm speaking a little bit from a Kickstarter perspective here. But there's the size of the game and all the stuff that comes with it. There's the weight of it, which some games can be pretty heavy, like Dinosaur World, etc. And then there's the number of SKUs, the number of different things that are sent out. Which of these is the biggest impact, or is there something else I'm not thinking of that affects the cost of shipping?
All three of those. Yeah, I mean, so if you've got a bunch of SKUs, so if you're looking at like the Simon Kickstarter where you might have, 15 boxes, usually, so when you work with a 3PL logistics company who's picking stuff up, they'll tell you, oh, you get 5 picks for free, or you get 5 picks for the $250. But once you start going over that, it could be 20 cents a pick. So the more stuff they've got to put in a box, the more it costs. The heavier it is, the more it's going to cost. You might have to put more packing peanuts around it to make sure it doesn't get damaged. That costs money. And then I'll let Robert talk about dimensional weight, because like Dino World, the weight of the game, because it's a little bit bigger than a Ticket to Ride size box, we didn't get hit with dimensional weight, but the game weighed like 9 pounds. So that's where our cost came from. But I know with Robert can probably talk to dimensional weight a lot better.
I can. I'm in a unique position, as Nathan knows. Prior to being at AW, I was in the fulfillment side of things. So to is was talking about, yes, picks do come into effect as you start adding things. Now companies can get around that, such as what we did with Rome and things like that, where we get it pre-packed in China, and that can definitely help. But again, that is something that really is Chinese manufacturing can do. We've looked at pre-pack options here in the U.S. If we were to manufacture here, there really is none. The cost of raw goods on that cardboard makes it unattainable. Dimensional weight really does factor in here because, as he was talking about, the packing peanuts. So if I had a game, if I had a game that was 9 pounds, Ticket to Ride size box, and suddenly I added on, let's say we had 6 stretch goal add-ons that can't fit in that box. They're new things. They've got to all be packed inside a new box. I've got to protect that. Gamers want their games to come pristine. We've got to put foam around it. We've got to put peanuts, something that creates even more size to the game box that's being shipped to you. And at that point, we're back to the dim weight thing. Now, what was 9 pounds, and even if, let's say, all those add-ons were just minis that weigh next to nothing, but they're a size that is increased, that suddenly the box is larger. Now maybe that fulfillment company or FedEx is assessing that game as weighing 20 pounds when in fact it doesn't. So yes, and on top of that, the picks. Nathan's right. Most U.S. fulfillment companies are about 5. So once you cross 5, most European fulfillment companies were as $1.25.
Yep. And that makes sense, right? Because if you think about, this isn't you selling something on eBay and making a box. This is an assembly line that looks like a factory when they're packing these games out. So if they've got to have more stuff going into each box, it's more hands. The more unique picks you have, so like, Tom, you probably have this worse because you've got more ads. This one thing,
we have like 75 SKUs or so. Yeah.
Yeah, so you're going to wind up with probably 1,000 unique combinations of things going into boxes. For us, maybe we had 12 unique combinations, but that means they've got to set that factory, that assembly line up. So today we're doing everyone who got Dinosaur World, the hybrid add-on, and a promo card. And all those are getting assembled that day. And then the next day they're going to do some other combination. The other thing that'll happen is if things weigh like a bunch or they're oddly shaped, sometimes the warehouses will charge you an assessment for that because their people have to blow their backs out picking up this box all day and putting it in a thing. So there are also some hidden costs that can get you if you've got like, it's the reason most of the time you get those big foam play mats. Those come like already in a tube, already labeled, because like warehouses in the US, they do not want to deal with stuff that's oddly shaped like that. So you really have to prepackage that in China most of the time.
Right, and even if they will, they're going to charge you now to order specialty boxes.
Yeah.
That's the other thing that comes in. Like, so that Galactus statue, if that thing's going in a box, I guarantee you that is a custom size box. No fulfillment company has a box that size ready to go.
Yeah, I assume they're packing that out in China.
Right. Now I know Simon, one thing I do respect, and that's another reason why I know their shipping's got to be pretty tight on here, because I know they pre-pack all their backers in China. So that does help with them. But if Nathan or I were doing this, we might not have the option to pre-pack every backer uniquely in China. I can put them into sections. Like maybe I know I have 6 groups. Most people fall into that pre-pack. All right, I can try to do that. But I've got these other 3,000 backers who are completely unique, and I can't pre-pack those.
And the pre-packing, going back to the very first topic, where pre-packing used to be more reasonable, but as the ocean freight costs have gone up, pre-packing games, because it's now coming in a bigger box that's got the foam and all of that, you're now getting even less games in that container. So the cost, I mean, I know a campaign that can only get about 600 games on a 40-foot container that's coming out. And I don't think that's unique. I think there's a few that are like that. If you're paying $25,000 to $30,000 and you're getting 600 games on that container, just do the math, right? Like you could be paying $20 ocean freight for a game quite easily. And so that's something that a lot of campaigns don't take into consideration. And so it worries me about folks that are running first-time campaigns who maybe haven't done their homework, because, you know, a company like Arcane Wonders, a company like Simon, when something unexpected happens, been around long enough, know what they're doing, have other sources of income that can offset losses or expected profits going away. But really, if anyone out there who's listening is thinking about doing their first campaign, like, shoot an email to somebody in the industry that you know, that if you've met them, you just like their company, and just ask. We're usually pretty nice people, because these first-time campaign runners are very potentially looking at complete financial ruin if they don't account for all of these things appropriately.
Yeah, and Nathan's right in terms of the difference with the pre-pack. So that is something else that actually really comes into play in the campaign that brought up this more recent discussion. Is in the past, pre-packing in China, yes, it increased your freight, but it saved you so much on the fulfillment side that it was worth it. And the savings on the fulfillment side, that was passed through the backers.
Yeah.
Foundations of Rome, if in the pre-pack, that took on average, that took $5 off each fulfillment cost. That is massive, but that was in the past when containers were $7,000, $8,000. And so that couple of inches on each side really didn't increase. Whereas in this case, that added 2 more containers. That is not offset. So there is no longer a reason to pre-pack over on this side and pass that savings. So that's part of what you'll see an increase in the shipping, because we're not saving anything on this side that we can pass through to backers.
Well, let me ask you this. You guys have been talking about size a lot. And so I know that over the past few years, Kickstarters have been getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And in fact, and customers want bigger projects. This has been coinciding with the fact that shipping keeps going up. The thing is, I'll notice, I always see people complain on the internet. Some people have mentioned in comments, hey, if they made it with cheaper components, I would buy that. And yet I notice when a Kickstarter company does offer the cheaper version, very few people back that. Almost everyone backs the bigger one. Is this spiraling out of control? What's going to break first?
We can actually, so I could actually cover that perfectly. Freedom 5. We listened to that. We offered the cheaper standee version, a much smaller box, and almost no one took it. To the point, it's actually more expensive for me to even produce it than if those people had just bought the full version.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're right. Nathan, I'm gonna let you take over there.
Yeah, this is a very difficult, I think, conversation, because I think what's going to break it is the conversation we're having today, which is now that the shipping cost is so high, and I think you're already seeing this on Kickstarter. I'm seeing a lot fewer projects get into that $500,000 range, seeing fewer projects getting into the $1 million range. It's not to say it's not happening, but I think that a few things. Obviously, everyone's dealing with inflation in their real lives, and the cost of everything that everyone's buying has gone up. And it's going up for the reasons we're talking about today, right? The board game industry is not unique. And that's going to mean that folks have less disposable income than they may have had over the last few years. And that's probably going to make people look at a $550 all-in campaign and go, maybe I need one of those this year, or one of those every couple of years, instead of backing 4 or 5 of them in a year. To both of y'all's points, Kickstarter has become a place for premium products for the most part. And so a decade ago, if you really loved a game like Agricola, you had to go buy your animal add-on. You had to go buy all these aftermarket things to upgrade the game and get the game to be the coolest version of the game that you can have. And there's still companies that will do that for titles. But what Kickstarter has basically turned into is, let's make the most deluxe, crazy, coolest version of the game up front for the folks that want that. And the games that we put on Kickstarter, when I look at the quality of what that game looks like, it's bonkers, and it's something that we could never sell into retail. So like Dinosaur World, we heat transferred on both sides of the Dino Meeples for the Kickstarter version. If we ever tried to sell that version into retail, it'd be $150, $180 game, but we were able to do it for $80, $90 on Kickstarter because we knew we were getting the full margin, right? So if I sell a game in a distribution, I might be getting 40% to 50% of the SRP. If I'm selling it on Kickstarter, I'm getting 85% of the SRP after fees and stuff to Kickstarter, stuff to the credit card process, maybe 88, 89%. And so we can put a lot more in the box for the same price, which is great. And I think that's what led us over time to where we are. Is when Kickstarter was new, it's like, oh, I could put more custom wood in this. I could put a little bit more plastic. I think Zpocalypse was probably actually the first big minis game, and the quality of those figs compared to what you see now, or even I want to say the very first I think Come On hit Kickstarter around 2013 the first time, and the quality of those figs, the size of those figs, right? Like the large figurine in some of those early kind of Zombicide games is probably like this big.
Right.
And that was the big boss that you would fight. And then over time, you kind of get this creep of, well, I've got to do something cooler than the last campaign. And the customers want something cooler than the last campaign. The company making it wants to make something cooler than the last campaign. You don't want to just keep doing the same thing again and again. And so then you start getting more detailed figurines. You start getting slightly larger figurines. And the cost of shipping was so relatively cheap globally because the global supply chain was really efficient right up until COVID made it really inefficient with shutdowns and work stoppages and shortages. And we're still feeling the reverberations of like what it's like to turn off 80% of the global economy and turn it back on in an 18-month period. And it's really broken the things that made these things are excessive, right, by their nature. Like a 4-foot-tall Galactus it's an excessive purchase, and it's super cool, and I want it. Like, I want to own that. That is awesome. But I think that we are probably going to have customers start looking at it saying, like, I can't afford to keep doing this, because now that all-in pledge, instead of being $470 shipping, is now $400 and $180 shipping. So now the consumer cost is higher, and I think I think that we're gonna see people go back to, the sort of Euro strategy games that we make have never really lended themselves to something like what CMON can do. And I think that Arcane probably just put out about as produced of a Euro game as you could possibly make. But even that is relatively compared to what you can do with like a Dudes on a Map minis game. It's pretty reserved. Right. If I had a crystal ball, I would be a lot richer than I am. But I do think that we're going to see some of this slow down. I don't think you're going to see anybody put out something that looks like the Galactus for the next year. I think that it's going to really tamp back a little bit. But also, I think customers vote. Y'all all vote with your dollars. And when campaigns are making $8, $9, $10 million with giant boxes, with 8 expansions right out the gate, tons of minis, companies make what people want to buy. CMON would not have made that Galactus if people didn't want to purchase it, right? So I think it's one of those things. It's easy to look at what CMON's doing and saying like, well, why did you overproduce this game? Why did you make it look like this? You could have made it simpler, and that's true. But also that customer base that engages with them on Kickstarter, and that's not 100% of board game customers. Probably most board game customers are not going to own that Galactus, but their customer base wants that. That's what they've said they've wanted, and we've seen them making, they had the Cthulhu, and I thought that was going to be the biggest mini I've ever saw in my life, and then it wasn't. And so, I think it's companies and customers kind of get into this echo chamber where you kind of can work yourself in a direction because you're both giving each other what you want, which is customers are buying it and companies are making the crazy stuff that customers want.
Well, it's sort of what all brought us all to Kickstarter in the first place. It was about making dreams happen that you couldn't have done through the old models. Yeah. And it's turned into gamers are getting the games of their dreams that we could not have put into retail, but we're also making the games of our dreams that we couldn't have done otherwise. Foundations of Rome absolutely would not have been what we wanted it to be had we gone into retail. So some of the bloat comes from both sides. But again, as Nathan said, it really comes down to over time, customers vote with their dollars. And if customers are consistently buying these things, then the next Kickstarter, just in terms of games in general, has to do something bigger. Otherwise, it's, well, this last Kickstarter did this. You're not even coming to that level. So we've got we have scope creep. Yeah. But it's both on the consumer side and the publisher side meeting in the middle, which is amplifying it. And so, but if we suddenly tried to yank the chain out and be like, all right, we're going to do a moderate normal game, well, then no one's going to back it because they're like, well, this doesn't bring anything new that I've never seen. They're not excited. But also, we're going to get, and Nathan, I'm sure you've heard this one before, why do you need Kickstarter for this? Yeah. And then we've reset back to a previous point. And so if people say that, and I've seen it on smaller campaigns where they're like, why would you need Kickstarter for this? So when newer publishers or newer campaign creators are looking at it, they're looking at that and going, oh, well, so that didn't work. I'm going to have to go crazy and make a Galactus the size of a small child.
Yeah, I want to jump on something that Rob said that is 100% true, and I think gets lost in this, like, sort of, once you start talking about board game publishers as these, like, faceless entities, like, I know the people that work at CMON. Like, I've hung out with them. Some of them are friends of mine. I guarantee you they were as excited or more excited about that Galactus than anyone who purchased it. And it's because this is an industry. There are not very many people who are in this industry who got here to make a fortune and don't like board games, right? There's not a lot of money in this business. I mean, there's money in it, but you're not going to become, a billionaire making board games. You're not probably going to become a millionaire making board games, but we do it because we love it. I back most of the dumb campaigns that exist. I don't back like the Dudes on the Map because it's not my style of game, but like I've got the All-In Dark Tower pledge right behind me. And that tower is massive and it's awesome. And I'm very excited that I own it. A lot of the people that are making these games, we're also like we got into this because it was our passion. We may be the most hardcore board game fans that exist are the people who are in the industry. And that does mean that we sort of enable ourselves. Like when we were sitting down to do the Kickstarter for Dino World, I was getting excited about what the final product was going to look like. I was like, we've never made a game that's going to look this pretty. This game is going to be so cool when it's set up on the table. And we made some stupid decisions on the amount of every single card has unique art, and it costs a dumb amount of money to do that. And I don't think backers even cared. But like Molly, myself, and our graphic designer were like, it's going to look dope.
It's our dream.
Exactly. It's like, why did every single dino pin need a unique dino pin illustration instead of a generic dino pin? It didn't. And in Dino Island, we didn't have unique illustrations. But it bugged us. For like 7 years, we're like, if we're going to go big, we're going to make this better than ever. And so a lot of this is like, it's easy to say like, oh, y'all are being greedy. You're putting too much in the box. A lot of it's because we're all giant children also that want these things. And I get way more excited when I wake up in the morning and I'm working on an over-the-top stupid project than a little card game.
Right. And it gets even more exciting when 8,000 other people are just as excited with you about it.
The endorphin rush of when you put something that you've been working on for 12, 18, 24 months onto Kickstarter and you have a huge first day, like it is some of the best days like in my life is watching that happen, because yeah, it means the campaign's going to happen. We're going to get to make the thing, but it's also, it is really reaffirming. And that's one of the things that draws companies to Kickstarter is it's really good to engage with fans on Kickstarter and see how excited they get. But I'll say, like, when things go bad and things like the shipping, the most deflating things that can happen to a company is when folks start getting upset at them about something related to shipping or a production problem or whatever. Like, some of the worst days in my life for the company have been when a production problem gets found out on a Kickstarter and we've got to delay the game for 3 months, because I know people are going to be upset. So that's the other thing I'll say is, like, I know I'm a publisher, so I'm very like self-interested in this, but there are folks on the other end of the keyboard and they very often are as upset when something's gone wrong. Like I don't think Simon was looking forward to pressing update when they pushed that out. They were dreading that day. They knew that this backlash was coming, and if they could have avoided what they're dealing with right now, I fully believe they would have, because they don't want it for mental reasons, and they don't want it because people are now upset at their company. They did it because they had to.
So that's the thing I was gonna say on what you just said there is, you know, the highs, but for every Kickstarter publisher, the worst moment is when we enter those shipping prices in there for us. We want to charge you as little shipping as we can. There's no publisher who's like, I'm just going to inflate these shipping rates, because you know the backlash, and that takes out so much of the high that you had and the enjoyment. So yeah, I imagine in the case of this, when I look at the old shipping rates versus the new, and a lot of that has to do with when you're running numbers initially, you're working with limited information. I have no doubt that some spreadsheet said that those should be the numbers at one point. When they ran the final, that was painful for someone on the other side of the keyboard to have to put in there.
And it's possible they made a mistake on that early. You know, I'm not in there. Maybe somebody looked at the campaign they had just delivered 3 months earlier and assumed the numbers would be similar. Right. It's hard to know what went on there because we're not internal. But yeah, I do agree. Whoever had to update to the real shipping prices, that was a very bad day for them.
Sure, and this, you know, we just been dealing with this here because we put up the pledge manager at Dice Tower, and we're shipping small stuff. And when I found out that it would cost, you know, maybe $20 from end to end to get a small little tiny package to somebody, you know, in Europe or wherever it might be, and I said that's not worth it. And Kenny said I checked every company, you know, and it's the same at every single one. And I knew as soon as we announced that, people were going to yell at us, call us greedy, call us deceitful, and we're not. And folks, that's one of the reasons I wanted to do this, was because I wanted. It's not like there's this consortium of greedy publishers behind the scene. Go online, every publisher is saying the same things. And so I wanted you to hear that. There's definitely bad bad actors in the industry, right? There's the occasional publisher that is doing things they should not do, cutting corners, lying. But that's the exception rather than the normal rule here. I really enjoyed doing this morning here, and I would like to do this more, folks. If you like this, let me know in the comments and thumb up. And publishers, if you want to come on and talk about other things in the future, maybe we can make this a bit of a series to talk about things like art and whatever. There's a gazillion topics.
Happier things.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's interesting. No, I think it's good for people to see this stuff behind the scenes and how it works. So before we go here, first of all, I want to say thank you to both of you for coming on. But were there any final thoughts you want to say before we shut it down today? So no?
No, I think we're good. Just thanks everyone for watching, and feel if you want to reach out to us or wherever on social media, if you've got any follow-up questions, we're happy to help. But just thanks for hosting this. I think it's going to be. I think it was useful for us, and hopefully it was useful for the people listening.
Yep. Also, same. Thanks for hosting us. It was great to talk about this. To backers, and consumers, feel free to reach out. We're all pretty open on things. And to publishers who are thinking about starting Kickstarter or haven't done it, feel free to reach out to either one of us. We'll be happy to help you because, that's what I got there. I just,
All right. Well, thank you, Robert. Thank you, Nathan. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you back live here again on Monday with Board Game Breakfast. And we got plenty of other videos going up this week. Until next time, though, I'm Tom Vasel, and you've been watching The Dice Tower.